Hello everybody, welcome back to my movie review series. Today we will be discussing 28 Years Later. If you've not seen one of my movie reviews before, what we do is I will give you some overview as provided by Google, some general thoughts, some general impressions on the cinematography, the cast, the major themes, anything that really stood out to me. Read you the overview as well as some of the other rating systems, IMDb, Rotten Tomatoes, so on and so forth. And then I will grade the movie on an A to F grading scale, the American primary school system. A being well done, B being entertaining, C just being whatever, D being actively off-putting, and F being a movie that I turned off or walked out of the theater and still found a reason to talk about to some extent. And so, today we have 28 Years Later. It is labeled a horror and slash thriller film. It has a runtime of 1 hour and 55 minutes. It was released in 2025 and it is rated R. Just watched this last night on Netflix, so if you have a subscription, just the regular subscription gets you access. So Google says, 28 Years Later is a 2025 post-apocalyptic horror film, the third in the 28 Days Later series, directed by Danny Boyle and written by Alex Garland, starring Jodie Comer, Aaron Taylor Johnson, and Ralph Fiennes. Not sure if I'm saying the names right. It is set 28 years after the Rage virus outbreak. It follows a group of survivors on an isolated island who discover new mutations and threats on the mainland, blending coming-of-age themes with intense horror. The film was released in June 2025 with a sequel 28 years later, The Bone Temple, already filmed back-to-back. And so, it says this is the third one. I saw 28 Days Later. You can see we reviewed it right here on this channel. And so when it says it's the third in the series, if there's one I'm missing, I have not seen that. But regardless, it is rated 6.6 out of 10 on IMDb, and it is rated 88% on Rotten Tomatoes. Overall, I'm a fan of the apocalyptic genre. I just like to see, again, I've said it a bunch, but the writing scripts of when society breaks down. Hey, we're all, living in this industrial society. Some outbreak happens, some disease, some catastrophe, some natural disaster, even zombies. The more fantasy elements I'm not a huge fan of sometimes, but this kind of breaking down of society theme is something that I think is a fruitful writing script, certainly a preference or a genre that I enjoy. So apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic movie is something I enjoy, right smack dab in the middle of that genre. The overall cinematography is realism with a dash of fantasy, which I actually thought complemented this movie very well. And so my overall thoughts is the plot development was strong, the scene continuity, just the progression, how long we stay on a certain topic, how long we stay on a certain scene, and then progress to the next one, I thought was well done. I thought the overall characterization, the relationship of the boy, we follow, I think, what is his name? It's like Snipe, or it's Spike. His name is Spike. It's not even here on the cast list. But the main character, the main boy, his name is Spike. And so even with minimal dialogue or kind of just the way the characters are presented, I thought his relationship with his mom was presented as a pretty strong development throughout the movie. And so I don't know why we don't have the proper characters, but Google is sometimes funny about that. But regardless, just from reading this, not sure about this third series, what the second movie would have been. But overall, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm going to go and give it an A-. I think it's well done if you like the, again, mostly realistic, but post-apocalyptic with some fantasy elements, some CGI, some grotesque. The zombies are like accentuated and exacerbated or exaggerated, to this like be really fat, to be really grotesque is a really appropriate word. And so some gore, but even like the gore elements of the movie are more so to accentuate the overall plot. It's not like realistic gore. It's a serious tone, but the gore elements are not presented as realism. So overall, I'm going to give it an A-. I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. So if you've not seen it and would like to, there will be spoiler alerts from this point forward. Movie opens up, you get some people in primary school. We're in England. It's set in England. The entire movie is 28 years later after this outbreak. You just have one initial cutscene of kids watching Teletubbies and then zombies, kind of refreshing you what's going on. And so it's set in England on this island. It's called the mainland, and so they kind of have, I immediately get an analog or scene kind of comparison to the Maze Runner, where you have the sequestered, all the people are like sequestered, and you have normal life. And then they have what's called the causeway, but just some sort of literally a land bridge over water. It seems way too short to be the English Channel, so I'm not sure what island on the actual geography. But in England, they have a causeway, kind of this just like big palisaded, like wooden barricades to sequester themselves on this island. And the overall functionality of life is pretty, I don't want to say normal, but there's not a bunch of zombies running around. You have a bunch of uninfected people, and then outside of their city walls, their little barricade is infected people. And they do so by going over this thing called the causeway, where you have this high tide and low tide, basically just makes it easier or impossible to cross from the mainland to their little sequestered island. And so you open up, you have Spike and his father. The mother is kind of sick. You're not really sure what's going on with her. The initial scene where you see the mom, she's very tense, very intense, kind of screaming, screeching. But the father and the son, Spike, they're getting ready to go hunting. He's coming of age, and, part of their kind of just, I guess, growing up, because this is 20 years later after this outbreak, to kill the zombies. And so they're getting up to go on this hunt. They kind of have there's this woman character who's kind of like the head guardian or something, but just like the manager or the admiral or general or whoever's watching this outlook post to go through this causeway to go to the mainland. And so the mom's not super happy that Spike is going. The dad's, excited for this coming of age hunting trip, so to speak, with his son to go get some zombies. So they go across the causeway, they consent, they say, hey, if we don't come back, this lady says, no one's coming to look for you, and they're all happy to go and, get some kills of these zombies. So the father and Spike go and do so. He kills one fat one, he shoots him in the neck. They're using bows and arrows, not guns. And so they kill a couple. There's a couple, fight scenes. You do have some for the actual cinematography. You have kind of like splicing or cut scenes where you get some CGI elements, you get some sort of like flashback to like old England or something, but I think it's well done. Just like those kind of splicing elements gave me similarity to, I think, The Northman, it was called, a movie we reviewed, where again, it's this realism kind of setting for sure, and then like 10% fantasy element, same type of thing with 28 years later. And I thought this was done in a palatable fashion. And so you get some flashbacks to old England, you get some flashbacks to, again, the father's training at different points in time, but they kill some of these zombies, and then they're going to go back to the causeway to return and celebrate their hunting expedition, and they kind of come across more of these zombies. And so the overall characterizations of the zombies, pretty standard. They're infected with some disease. They're still alive, but they're definitely not human beings. And then in this movie, you kind of have skinny ones that run real fast, extremely fat ones that are just like eating everything, and then kind of this like bigger one who's kind of like a giant. This is a rated R movie. They do have some sexual appendages in the movie, which is kind of funny almost. Again, not off-putting, but it's just like the zombies are definitely naked, I'll put it that way. And the bigger ones have bigger proportional appendages. And so definitely something that sticks out. But regardless, it is a minor aspect of the overall cinematography. And so they go back to their little island, and then they can't. And they're blocked off by kind of this bigger zombie, kind of moderating and directing the smaller zombies, not with like words, but just with overall behavior and presence. And so they kind of retreat, they go back to this house, they find an attic, they stay up there for a while, and in the morning the attic comes crashing down, and they're able to scurry around, fight some more zombies, and then they cross back over the bridge. During this time, they see another like hill, they go up on a ridge, and then they see this, the father's talking to the son, and he's like, hey, I used to know this guy who was a doctor that lives kind of down in this valley. And then you have a flashback scene where it's the father's younger, and he's seeing this doctor guy that was part of his village when this infection hit, and he's kind of like laying out a bunch of bodies, and he's not sure what's going on, and the father assumes it's nefarious or bad or evil. And so regardless, they kind of fight off these zombies, they scurry off, and they're able to go across the causeway, go back to their little village, and Spike is celebrated, his father's all excited, his mother's still not super happy, but then very quickly, I keep forgetting, Spike goes against kind of his dad. And so what happens is Spike is talking to his grandfather. He learns that this guy that they saw when they were on the mainland with all of these bodies was an actual doctor. We have Mr. Gusman, the dog, coming here. And so hopefully we can continue on. But he has this fight with his father. He's like, hey, mom's sick. We don't know what's going on with her. Why don't we go take her to this doctor? And his dad's like, hey, this guy's lost his mind. And Spike is not having it. And so he kind of threatens his dad with his knife. The father's able to take him. Again, Spike is like 12 I think he's like 12 in the movie. And so when he's doing his hunting, he's still, a novice with his bow. His father's characterized as a more apt warrior type guy. Takes the knife and kind of gives it back to him like, hey, you can't physically threaten me, but if you don't want me around, I'll leave. So the father kind of storms off. And I think he's pretty much, for the most part, there is one other small scene, but I think he's pretty much out of the film at this point. And so, regardless, then the next day, kind of, Spike takes his mom to go, he kind of distracts this guard lady, and then they go back across the causeway, and he's going to take his mom to the doctor to figure out what's going on with her. And so they go back across, they immediately have some more run-ins with the zombies, and then they run into an Eric, who's this character from Sweden, the overall English island. The UK, I would assume geographically, is being patrolled by everybody else from Europe. And so we have this Swedish soldier who kind of like loses his ship, and he's armed with an actual gun. Spike just has a bow and arrow, and his mom is kind of sick, and she's overall normal, sane, calm, but she kind of just has like, I don't want to say delusions, but she ends up having cancer. So she has some sort of like mental, she's just not all there all of the time. But not in like an aggressive way, not in like an infected zombie type of way. And so they meet up with this Eric guy. Eric kind of rescues them. They kill a bunch of zombies in this kind of like abandoned diner type of environment. That is one thing about the apocalypse movies that I do like, that I think could have been stronger, is just kind of like exploring the environment. Like I really like, you have this huge society breaks down, then you have all of these buildings and facets of society, transportation, that just, unmanned, all of this infrastructure. I think you kind of have some in like I Am Legend, when Will Smith is like hitting the golf balls on top of the aircraft carrier. I think there could have been more room for exploration of the landscape, but not the focus of the plot. And so regardless, they meet Eric, they kill a bunch of zombies in this diner area, and then they're just kind of traveling, and then they find a train. So on the train, the mom, who I think her name is Isla, she gives birth, she acts as a midwife to this zombie chick who gives birth to a normal healthy baby. So she delivers the baby, then the big zombie with his appendage, definitely forefront, kind of chases them. He literally like rips Eric's head off and like pulls his whole spine out. A very similar type of thing to like Alien and Predator. I think it's the Predator one. But like when he takes the spine and keeps his skull as like a trophy. Very similar, definitely got some vibes from Predator in those types of scenes. But regardless, Eric is now dead, and then Spike and his mom make it to this doctor. The doctor's not crazy. He saves them a little bit by some sort of tranquilizer to this big zombie. He doesn't end up killing the big zombie, and then he takes him back to where the doctor takes Spike and his mom back to where he's been living. This cutaway scene we saw earlier where the dad is like, what is this guy doing with all these bodies? He's clearly gone insane. And so the bodies, some Latin phrase, moratorium, something about like remembering death. And so there's some sort of like, philosophical appeal a little bit, but overall I think it was a pretty strong showing of the characterization between Spike and his mom. The doctor diagnoses the mom with cancer, and they kind of cremate Eric's body because his skull is ripped off, and then there's big piles that before this doctor had been honoring the fallen and the dead. So, quick Barky break. We'll continue on. We'll just finish up. We only got a little bit left. And so, overall, the mom is sick. Pretty quickly, the doctor, we euthanize or, morally put down the mom. She is killed. The doctor has another saying in Latin, like, remember love or remember life. And so Spike takes his cremated mother's skull, puts it kind of on top of these big, again, kind of like the fantasy element that I was talking about. The cutaway scenes, the actual gore elements of the zombies, and then these big pillars of like skulls and bones to memorialize the dead are the kind of like the CGI fantasy type of elements on this backdrop of an overall realistic portrayal of human behavior. And so they memorialize the mom. Spike has the baby. He kind of goes back to his town, this causeway, and he kind of puts the baby on. Oh, come on, we are so close. I'll check back here in a second. And so, just finishing up, I got the dog right here. But Spike takes this baby that was born from the zombie. His mother is now passed. We have a good, like I said, it was pretty strong characterization. Someone's like tearing up over here about this again. We just watched a big zombie with a huge appendage, but it's, again, the characterization was overall strong for not too much dynamic or dialogue between Spike and his mom, Isla. But regardless, he kind of names the baby Isla, puts it in this little basket, puts it back at this, right at the causeway where the high tide breaks this pathway to get back to their little sequestered town. And that's kind of like the final scene. You haven't really seen the father in the second half of the movie, or really like the second 2/3, or I guess the second 2/3. But that's what happens, and the father kind of runs out like, where's my son going? And so you don't really get great resolution on the relationship between the father and the son, because the son thinks the dad is like taking the mom from him. And so it could have been a little tighter of just like, what was the father doing by not telling the son? Did the father just not know? Could have been a little tighter from the father to the son. Thought the mother to the son relationship was pretty strong. Regardless, you do get a fleeting scene of the father like, oh no, where's my kid? And then, Spike had dropped off the baby at their little sequestered camp. Regardless, coming to the conclusion of the movie, Spike is now back out into the world, and you can see clearly leads in, as we read in the beginning, to this Bone and Temple, the third movie, which I have not seen, but I will be watching shortly, tonight, tomorrow, whenever. But he kind of kills another zombie, and then he's kind of getting overrun by zombies. 20, let's say, are coming at him in kind of this stone cliff and a pathway, and then and then you kind of get like a Mad Max type of tone of like characterization. These people that are, come out, and there's 20 of them, and they're like, one guy leads them, and he's like, hey, Spike, good job with your arrows. Do you mind if we jump in now? And then you have this kind of almost Power Ranger-ish scene where they're all fighting the different zombies and killing them. Again, this fantasy type of gore, not super realistic presentation, fighting the zombies, they kill a bunch of them, and then the movie resolves by, hey, Spike is now he's amongst this other group of people on the mainland that he has not been aware of before, people outside of his village. And so that is where the movie concludes with a clear, as we read, there's another one. So I will be watching and reviewing that shortly, probably going to be doing more movie reviews. But that is what I have for 28 Years Later. Again, overall A-, definitely a movie that I enjoyed watching. So that is what I have for that movie. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one.